They seriously schedule an entire kit bash just as an excuse to wear the Titanfall armor again? Yes. Yes, I did. How could you tell? The general dislike for the Tau Empire is one of the first things that's drilled into every new 40k fan's head through thousands of memes, hundreds of Reddit posts, and hundreds of YouTube videos and their associated comments. It's kind of inescapable, and it's one of the things that I hear repeated most often from new fans. And while I understand that it is an exaggeration for most people, it is easy to see where they're kind of coming from. Amongst all the armies of 40k, the Tau do kind of stand out a little bit. So if they're gonna stand out anyway, why not make them stand out in a way that I personally enjoy? And by that, I mean ripping design influences straight from the best FPS game ever made, Titanfall 2. So, welcome to GoneHollowMinis, my name is Colt. Today we're standing by for Titanfall and fixing the Tau aesthetic while we're at it. Okay, first things first, I want to make it clear that I understand a lot of the Tau hate is just an exaggerated joke by the community, or a scab left over from earlier editions when the Tau were definitely a little bit overcooked. And despite the intro, I don't actually hate Tau myself. I personally really value aesthetic variety in my tabletop games, and I would rather go up against an opponent who found an aesthetic that's different to mine, but that spoke to them in a more honest way, than to have everything be a kind of homogenous, grimdark mix. That said, I do think that some of the Tau complaints might have a grain of truth or two to them, so using those complaints might give us a starting point on where to start our kit bash. As a new player getting into the setting and game system, you've probably heard the Tau described as either just Gundam the faction, or the even more reductive Space Communists. That first one has a bit more thought put into it, so let's work with that. The Tau occupy an interesting design niche within 40k, being at once definitively mechanical while maintaining some more organic and elegant design features. I've always imagined them as somewhere between the Imperium and the Eldar in terms of general technological aesthetics, if that makes sense. So let's take a closer look at the general Tau design and figure out what we want to change and how we want to change it. Like I said, I don't actually mind the Tau aesthetic, but I think we can push it a little bit further. Generally, I'd like my battlesuit to feel a bit more utilitarian. The big, curved, and segmented armor panels really push Tau further into Gundam territory than I personally like, so we'll either need to recreate those or somehow balance them out with maybe some flatter panels. Another detail I'd like to work on is the head. These have always screamed weak spot to me. I get that the humanoid appearance makes it easier for the pilot to interface with the suit, but still, I feel like we can keep the head looking like a head while bulking it out a little bit. Last thing, and perhaps one of the biggest, the weapons. I really don't like Tau weapons. I get the whole minimalist design aesthetic, but so many of these guns just feel half-finished to me. Like they got the core of the weapon down and just didn't bother to finish it. It needs at least 75% more greebles. And not to mention, I am not a huge fan of the weapons just being strapped onto the arms. It feels a little goofy to have built most of the arm, forgotten the hand, and just slapped the gun onto the wrist. So yeah, if you were keeping track, you probably noticed that I basically just described a Titan from Titanfall. And that's not by accident. I just do subjectively, personally think that Titanfall is the epitome of mech design, period, from anything that I've seen, personally again. I could just print Titanfall miniatures at the right scale and be perfectly fine with that, but come on, that's a little bit boring, and would lead to some scale wonkiness with the different size battlesuits. So instead, we're going to use Titanfall 2 and its aesthetics to inform our kit bash of a Tau commander. Okay, we'll be bouncing around a little bit here, but just bear with me, I'll explain why in a second. We're going to start with some of the more structural changes. The first thing I wanted to tackle is the body, since that is going to be the most complicated, geometry-wise. After building the torso and sitting with it a bit, I think that going with the kind of overhead canopy, like Titanfall 2's Ion, will work the best with the geometry of the commander's battlesuit. But since that's a rather specific piece, we're gonna have to build it ourselves. I start by shaving down the neck portion of the torso, and cutting away these little sensor boxes by the shoulders. I spent a bit of time fiddling with these pieces, trying to figure out what would be the best way to build up the body while blending everything into the existing plastic. Finding a decent angle, I started by gluing down a piece of plastic card that was way bigger than I needed it to be. This lets me trim it down after attaching it, working as I go instead of trying to figure out millimeter-specific measurements for pieces this small. Two tips here. Firstly, keep making regular checks with the headpiece. I didn't, and ended up needing to redo a lot of this work so that I could get back into the torso to shave down a bit more of the neck. Second, using superglue instead of plastic cement will help you attach these flat panels at the correct angles. There will be some squeeze out, but that's actually a good thing. It can act as a bit of a gap filler for us to sand down later. And don't worry about it not being strong enough. This whole chunk will all be glued together and fastened on in several different parts of the body, so strength shouldn't be an issue. After getting the sides positioned correctly, I beveled in the front sections a bit to narrow down around the head or eye section. Again, this was done using CA glue to fill gaps, and while being careful to keep my angles symmetrical. But like I said, I wanted to get this section out of the way first since it would be the hardest. With the proof of concept working okay, I could turn my attention to other parts of the pose and model, coming back to the head once the miniature had come together a little bit more. Speaking of the pose, the legs were next, or more accurately, the feet. The legs themselves were pretty much fine, but the feet are definitely a bit too Tau for me. To make some replacements, I used a pair of matching faces from an Armiger kit. These were snipped and sanded flat on the back, and had their eyes drilled out to match the commander's ball-jointed ankles. Toes were added by just using tiny pieces of square styrene rod and clipping out sections of the foot to get the right angle. Then the legs could be assembled basically as it shows in the instructions. The only other change I made here, for now at least, was to flip the pelvis piece. I like the detail on the back better than the front. With that done though, I could now turn my attention back to the torso. Firstly, by cutting down the head and gluing it in place, using the built-up torso to hide the truncated head piece. After that, I could complete the extended whole, using carefully clipped and sanded pieces of styrene. I also spent a bit of time working on the back of the torso too. I don't like how far these jet pieces stick out on the back, so to help them fit a bit closer in with the torso, I started by using a hobby saw to make a flat cut through this little round section in the back. This lets me attach these wing pieces a lot closer to the body, appearing as all one part of the torso. It just makes it feel a little more utilitarian to me and a little bit less Gundam. Now for the weapons, I did this in two separate chunks. First, I tried to basically match the design of most Titan weapons, with a kind of arm brace stock thing. This looked great, but didn't actually fit on the arm in any way that looked decent. So instead, I fixed the pose, and then added more greebles on from there. A big ammo drum, an ammo feed, and a little handle made out of bent brass rod. And of course, as you can see, the weapon was built up to have an actual handle to hold onto instead of being attached to the arm. Again, I just like the look of this better. Either give me Dreadnought-style gun arms or held weapons, just not the weird halvesies thing the Tau have going on. Luckily, the commander comes with a fist option, so this was fairly easy to do. After that was a whirlwind of final touch-ups and details, removing a lot of the little round Tau greebles, adding some larger flat panels, stowage, and the like to make the battlesuit feel more lived-in and utilitarian. And here we have the Kitbashed miniature. I'm honestly really happy with it. I think it's a decent blend of the Tau aesthetic, but with a few more details mixed in to make it all feel a little bit more grounded. The extended hull section in particular came out well, I think. And while it was a lot of work, I think a squad of crisis suits with similar modifications would look great alongside this guy. But now we can move on to painting. I want the bulk of this suit's armor to be white, with some green and orange accents to shamelessly mirror the cosplay that I spent ages making. Say what you will about my homebrew lore, but I can self-insert with the best of them. Anywho, I'm not actually that familiar with painting whole white armies. I've successfully avoided that more or less for some time, and I'm only now getting around to forcing myself to fix that. So I'm going to lean back on some classic weathering techniques to make that process a bit easier. After a black prime, I'm going to coat all of my armor panels with Pro-Acryl Red Gray. This is a darker beige color and will set us up to slowly build up our white armor color. After that, I'm going to apply some thinned ochre brown. This will set up some more earthy, dirty tones for our recesses and shadows. Then I'm jumping up to Vallejo Ivory. This is pretty well thinned, of course, but using this warmer off-white will brighten our armor to be recognizably white while not jumping straight to a dead white quite yet. But on that note, I will be using a bit of white ink as a final highlight on the upwards facing armor panels. This is looking a bit flat still, but I went ahead and made some freehand markings here. No plan really, just making up some interesting patterns using concept art from Titanfall as inspiration. Once that's done, I'm going to use an ivory black oil wash. This is the start of those maybe kinda sorta cheaty weathering techniques that I mentioned. This will add a whole lot of depth and grime to our armor, and sets us up for some extra weathering layers. With the oil wash removed and dried how I want it, I can go back to acrylics. Using some more ivory, I can add some sponge chipping and brush damage to my armor. The bright, pure ivory will stand out against our oil-stained armor and is a great way to blend in our colored markings with the rest of the white. As always, I also go back through and highlight those larger chips with a bit of dark brown. But that's the bulk of our white armor done. Still legs to grow on with this recipe, but hey, like I said, I have escaped painting white for this long, it'll take a few tries to get it right. But regardless, I just needed to clean up and paint a few of the extra details on our Totally Not a Titan, and he was ready to hit the tabletop. Man, am I happy with how this Kitbash turned out. Maybe it's a good thing that Tau don't have this sort of milsurp aesthetic, because I probably would have ended up as a Tau player for my first army. It is worth reiterating, this was a lot of work. And frankly, I'm kind of dreading the idea of doing a whole unit of crisis suits like this. But the results are kind of hard to argue with. Thank you so much for watching this Kitbash. I hope this video gave you some ideas on how to fix Tau in your own way, or at least scratch the Titanfall itch that we're never gonna get scratched for us. Thank you, Respawn. Anyway, if you enjoyed, why not drop a comment to give me some feedback, and drop a like while you're down there. Subscribe and turn on notifications to never miss an episode, and until we meet again, friends, be safe, be kind, and don't you dare go hollow.